Hi, welcome to week 6 of our history GCSE revision. Again, we're going to focus on the medicine topic. So, we're going to focus on the Renaissance period this week. And the question we're going to go on is question 4, the 12 marker, explain why. So if we can have a go this week for this week's homework, I'm going to go doing this question here. So explain why medical knowledge improved during Renaissance times. They will always give you two stimuli, in this case the printing press and William Harvey. But again, in order to get a higher mark, level 4, you must also include other information apart from the stimuli. So our structure is going to be the same, and it will be for the next couple of weeks. So what do they believe caused disease at this time? How do they treat and care for the sick? And our case study is going to be the Great Plague. So, very busy slide here. So what do they think caused it? So they began to have a much more scientific approach than had happened in the medieval times. So the first thing that kind of happened during this time was the Reformation period. So remember, this is Martin Luther challenging some of the ideas set by the Catholic Church. So while this was a kind of religious argument going on, the impact was that many people began to question, the power of the Church, and that we'll look at the importance of that later on. During this time, a doctor called Thomas Sydenham here was from the UK. He began to basically record symptoms down in detail, and obviously when he recorded multiple patients, he realized they often shared the same symptoms. So that brought him to the conclusion that the disease was not caused by the individual person, but maybe there was something else that was causing people to become ill. He also realised that in order to treat a disease, you need to treat the disease as a whole, so not separate cures for a runny nose, an itch, or whatever it would be, a rash. So really, let's try and treat this disease as a whole. So he's quite important in terms of coming up with new ideas. They also began to stop using urine charts and astrology, and much more direct observation of patients. Things that did continue during Renaissance times and became even more prevalent was this idea of miasma, bad smells causing disease. Foul humour still lingered on, propagated by the church again, which even though was being challenged, was still incredibly powerful at this time. What radically changed things during this Renaissance period was the printing press. So obviously what that did was produce exact copies of work and made it much quicker to produce knowledge. The two things, the impact of that was it reduced the control of the church and ideas. So instead of monks writing out, handwritten extracts, it enabled people to come up with the new ideas, go to the printing press, get them printed out quickly without the church controlling that information. Also, doctors could share knowledge much more effectively. Another thing that came from this period of time was something called the Royal Society. So this was important because it gave money to scientists to produce new research and come up with new ideas, and importantly also as well, they also published a journal which enabled scientists to share their ideas, put the ideas out there, people could contribute, and it's still going strong today, the Royal Society. So it became a central focus for the scientific community. Okay, in terms of caring for the sick, lots of things stayed the same. So, for example, hospitals were primarily run by, the church, but this was changed in 1536 when obviously Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries in order for him to marry Anne Boleyn. So a lot of the hospitals closed, and to fill the gap, a number of free charity-funded hospitals were set up. There weren't quite as many hospitals as there had been before, and it did take a few hundred years for the number of hospitals to get back to the same number as pre-Reformation, but there was much more run by physicians and doctors than religious, monks and nuns. There were also a number of pest houses established to deal with contagious diseases like the plague. So some good and bad things there with hospitals. Community care continued. Particularly women continued to care for the majority of people, giving advice and producing herbal remedies. And whilst this was a period of time where there's lots of new ideas which we're going to look at by Harvey and Vesalius, These were ideas that were slow to be accepted. We live in a world, a technological world, where things are changing very, very quickly. But if you speak to my gran, at the end of the day, she doesn't use the internet. She doesn't care about the internet. And again, this is a time people have all these really interesting, intriguing ideas, but because it didn't improve understanding what caused disease, people didn't realise what the practical purpose of it was, and there was no obvious improvements to treatment. So it's all well and good having really good ideas. Actually, does it make any difference to people? This is the key thing. Okay, what did improve for apothecaries and surgeons is they became much better trained, and that's really from experience. They began to develop an apprentice system, so you'd have a master within the apothecary or a master barber surgeon, and also they began to license them, so they'd have to be compulsory trained to actually become one of these people. Doctors, physicians had much better access to medical books and knowledge, particularly detailed drawings of anatomy, and they became much more practical and experimental. Dissection became more common, particularly in places like Padua in Italy, and doctors flocked to those places to see live dissections for themselves. Probably the wrong word, live dissections, but dead dissections. Also, Vesalius was really important. He improved understanding of the body, so he became a lecturer at Padua University. He did lots of famous dissections. He made experiments fashionable, and his work is widely published with very accurate drawings by Da Vinci himself. So Vesalius was really important in terms of publicising and increasing knowledge of the human body. William Harvey, so a really important figure in Renaissance period. So I'm just going to talk through him. So who was he? So first of all, he was obviously a very intelligent guy, went to Cambridge, but importantly also travelled to Padua so he could see dissections for himself. He was James I's doctor. He actually did public dissections himself, and he believed, like Sydenham, in observing the patients and recording their symptoms. And most famously, he came up with this theory of blood circulation and proved it. So what was that all about? Well, basically he proved Vesalius's theory that blood flowed towards the heart. That was correct. He also, through some mathematical equations and calculations, proved that blood could not be produced by the liver, because that's what Galen had said. He said if that was the case, then the quantity of blood would just be astronomical. So there must be another explanation. So he became, at the same time, he was influenced by new pump technology that was going on industrial, or not industrial, but it was going on in the world at this time. And he also discovered arteries and veins were part of the same system. So he theorised that blood was pumped around the body or circulated around the body. So the reason why he's so important was he proved that Galen was wrong about a number of things that he'd said. For example, that blood was produced by the liver. He improved knowledge of how the body worked. Because he was one of the king's doctors, he was very credible, and importantly got a lot of publicity for his work. So his methods have worked and were copied by others. And I think the most important thing, it left a lot of unanswered questions. What else could Galen be wrong about? So it led to a big increase in experimentation by other doctors. So we're going to move on to the next case study, which is the Great Plague. So the important thing with this is it's the same disease as the Black Death, bubonic plague, just a different time period. So what really had changed? Well, not that much. So would they still continue to believe that miasma, or even increasingly so, that miasma was the main cause of this disease? Most people still believe that God caused it. Increasingly less and less people believed it was astrology and the full humans as well. But I think what began to establish itself more and more this during Renaissance times was the disease somehow passed from person to person. They didn't know how, but they began to theorise that that was the case, because obviously they didn't understand about germs. How did they avoid catching it? Well, exactly the same as the Middle Ages: praying, lighting fires, carrying herbs, all of the same things as before. They did come up with some new ideas, something called transference. So the idea was, the favourite was using the bottom of a chicken. You'd rub it on the buboes. That would transfer the disease onto the chicken and then away from you as the patient. That didn't work, but it was an interesting idea. Second one's about sweating. So you'd sit a patient in front of a fire, make them sweat it out. And again, you can understand the reasoning behind that. But again, it didn't work. The biggest difference really between Great Plague in Renaissance times, and the Black Death was the role of the government. So the things on the left here, in the green, these are things the government did that I think would have helped stop the spread of disease. So, for example, they closed down theatres and big public gatherings, obviously reducing contagion. They actively tried to clean the streets. They collected the dead on the third picture there and did mass burial pits. And famously, they quarantined people in their homes and locked them in their homes for 28 days, put the Red Cross on the door. Obviously, that did help stop the contagion, the spread of disease. Other things they did do, which didn't really help, but obviously they didn't know this, was they'd burn barrels of tar in the streets. Obviously, that's linked to the idea of miasma. They killed little cats and dogs, which didn't help, probably made it worse, because obviously probably led to more rats. They continued to pray, and that again tells us everything we need to know. So very, very similar, not a huge amount of change. The only real difference particularly was the government getting more actively involved in what we would know today or call public health.